I'm Alan. I'll be your driver today. We'd like to welcome you to Crazy Horse. This hatch begins that year in 1947 after Marshal Dakota arrived from Connecticut. There are no roads out here, water or electricity. Marshal lived in a tent for 7 months. They can only clear off enough trees in this area. Build a sculpture home and studio on a log. In the late 1950s, they helped the family situation out because they had 10 children and helped make ends meet. They opened up a dairy with the white goats here in the trees above the draw. Now they no longer operate a dairy, but they still raise cattle. I'd like to direct your attention to that tunnel underneath the arm. That tunnel was started by Marshal Dakota in 1967. It took Marshal and Sons about 2.5 years to carve that tunnel underneath the arm. The purpose of that tunnel is so they could bring Dakota coming through on this side of the mountain to move that rock to get down to better granite for carving. Eventually, as you continue the carving at Crazy Horse, that opening come about 100 foot wide, going to about where the wrist is at, and most of where the chin is located. Right now, the tunnel is about 4 stories high and wide enough for 2 bulldozers to sit side by side. Several locations in Black Hills looking for suitable granite large enough to do a carving on when they came to this spot here. This was on the Eller Homestead, consisting of 150 acres, and part of that mountain, which at that time was called Featherhead Mountain, we now know it as Crazy Horse Memorial. So after Marshal acquired this, we went about making 747 wooden steps to get to the top of that mountain, and the first blast occurred on June 3rd, 1948. That was the only blast that occurred the entire year. Back into this day when Chief Standing Bear saw the carving being done at Mount Rushmore, they felt that the Native Americans should be represented with some kind of a memorial carving honoring some of their heroes. He did approach Guns of Morgan about doing memorial carving. When he did it Mount Rushmore, that was turned down. In the summer of 1939, Guns of Morgan was honored by Marshal Dakota was invited by Guns of Morgan up to Mount Rushmore to work for him as an intern at Mount Rushmore, which he accepted. While Marshal was here working at Mount Rushmore, Chief Standing Bear read the publicity about Marshal in the newspaper and contacted to be done on Tuesday. I just can't tell you what year. Realistically, Marshal Dakota thought this project would easily take 100 years or longer to do. 100 to 100 mark from a couple inches. They need water to cool that with. There is no water up there, so they take the water truck up there when they're doing that sawing. This is a viewing area here where we'll go ahead and get out. We just ask you to stay in this designated area, and for safety concerns,